She's a firm believer in the possibility of the unfinished.
I think the bigger sin is to not try to start at the end. Because then you try to be nice. But then a lot of times what does it is it's not
It's intriguing, isn't it? Some of the lots of things, even if we don't complete them, can help us to discover our passion, or even to experience the richer abundance of life. Sometimes I find that the idea that incompleteness is a kind of moral or personal defect doesn't seem so clear-cut.
Years have shifted a bit from feeling that my inability to complete things is some kind of failure
Jan Hendrickson is a composer and artist.
to actually embracing the idea the things that I make never quite finished, that they're always in a process and always in some way incomplete.
Jan explores leaving things in an unfinished state through his art and music. He staged a performance in early 2024, commissioned by the experimental Mozart Brixton Lab. In it, he plays a bamboo flute.
Over the course of the piece, I destroy it with a blowtorch. And this is amplified using microphones and so on. And this produces a lot of smoke, it produces a lot of sound, it produces quite a dramatic visual effect. What I noticed was that as the food started to burn, crack, decay, there were a lot of different sounds that emerged that I couldn't possibly have predicted. I'm less interested in the sound work as an object, but more as a process and witness.
Jan's art and music is deliberately left open or unfinished. And it subverts an idea that's deep in our culture that tends to see progress in linear terms, with a clear beginning, middle, and an end. And it's an idea that's centuries old.
Islamic geometers and rug designers and weavers often include elements of imperfection in their work, in the belief that only God is perfect and unchanging and that everything else is subject to imperfection. The Japanese aesthetic concept of wabi-sabi is this aesthetic value of something which is slightly worn or damaged or broken or repaired, where the process of life is visible through looking at the object.
It's the principal seen in the educational philosophy of Rudolf Steiner, too.
The dolls don't have faces. Some of these ideas are more to do with finding a connection with process in life rather than presenting something that is perfectly complete.
Maybe it's only as adults that we develop an obsession with task completion and finishedness.
I've observed in my children that they are often telling a story through the drawing. It's less important that the drawing reaches a point of being finished and is hung on the wall or stuck on the fridge. It's more that they are undertaking an imaginative journey, and that journey is being assisted by the drawing process. And very often children will completely scribble over their painting or drawing, or they will destroy it, or they will just leave it unfinished. The point being that the object at the end is not the thing that they're really interested in.
This has a fascinating echo with educational psychology. When we get children to focus on completing the task, or say, getting a good grade, it's easy to obscure the intrinsic fascination in the journey. Because making a painting, for example, isn't just about getting a grade A in art. It's about expression, creativity. Jan emphasizes finding a connection with the process in life, rather than presenting something perfectly fashioned. And this is at the heart of what Macy and Jen started too. 3 weeks after they began their search for finishers, they had hundreds of knitters coming forward from across the United States, offering to complete unfinished pieces left behind by loved ones. And after getting some local news coverage, the word spread. By early 2023, there were over 1,000 people getting in touch and over 100 Jen and Macy gave their initiative a name, Loose Ends, and the pair began encountering poignant stories behind those items.
This woman, her daughter had passed away suddenly. It was a suicide. It was very sad. And she was carrying around this unfinished piece that her daughter had been crocheting up until the night she passed away. She didn't know what to do with it, and she wanted something. Our finisher figured out how to turn it into a blanket, and she was able to turn it into an arc and put granny squares all around it. And it turned out to be like a queen-size quilt that the finisher turned into a rainbow. And the mother said, you know, I think people hang quilts on walls. And I said, they do. But wouldn't it be nice to be able to wrap yourself in it? And she said, oh, yeah, that's what I want to do.
I find this rather beautiful. The idea that unfinished works don't just fly the imagination in new ways, but that they can bring people together. Many of the greatest minds in history left behind unfinished works that found new life long after they were started. Franz Kafka finished none of the 3 novels that he started. He rarely published, and when he did, it was only at the insistence of his friends. And much of his fictional work contains musings on the impossibility of completion. Michelangelo also famously left behind 4 unfinished sculptures of slaves. They remain incomplete after the Pope who commissioned them died, yet they hold endless fascination because they permit a glimpse into the thought process of a brilliant mind, and they've been interpreted in countless ways. We generally start a project with the aim of completing it successfully, and we celebrate that. But unfinishing in art and creative work in particular is interesting, and it's important. It's different to never finishing projects at the office, which can cause the kind of discomfort that Zygarnik described. Consciously not finishing provides room for the imagination of the viewer. It invites a kind of collaboration between the artist and those observing, or perhaps even adding to the art. A theme amongst many unfinished works of great artists and writers is death and loss. And that can be a reason why we may never even know that a piece of great unfinished work existed.
My mother was very much the black sheep artist of the family.
This is Nina Collins. Her mother, Kathleen Collins, was an African-American writer, academic, and filmmaker born in 1956.
She was a black single mother in the 70s and 80s, working in New York City. She taught at City College, she wrote plays, she wrote short stories, and then she started to work on films.
Kathleen Collins also worked in the civil rights movement and was one of the people who worked on Martin Luther King's speeches.
All to the horror of my grandparents, who did not want her doing any of this. This was a really different time for black women artists. There were just very, very few of them, and there was no money.
Kathleen Collins died of cancer in 1988. She was just 46. She left very city to pursue granted ambitions in the country.
It's a film about a black female academic, intellectual, and her painter husband who's also black. It's about this woman's internal life, basically, and it's about her marriage, and it's about her philosophical crises.
Like much of her work, the film didn't have success during Kathleen's lifetime.
Distributors literally said to her, these aren't real black people. At the time, that just was not anything that people showed in the culture. So she made it in 82. She tried to get distribution and failed, and then she got sick.
Kathleen's death in 1988 was quick and unexpected. Nina was 18 years old.
I didn't know she was sick until 2 weeks before she died. No one really knew. She really kept it private. After she died, I basically collected all of her work. I kind of gathered all of her stuff and stuck it in a trunk. It was really just lots and lots of paper and this VHS.
That VHS was a copy of the film her mother had made, Losing Ground.
Over the next 20 years, I would watch it occasionally. I knew that people in certain small circles kind of revered my mother, but I also knew that no one really knew who she was. But I never actually really looked in the trunk. I never read the writing.
Over those 2 decades, Nina kept the trunk closed and hidden away. It was too upsetting. That is, until she reached her 30s.
Basically, I was super angry and super depressed and acting out all over the place. And I realized that I needed to understand my childhood. And that was when I began the process of understanding her work and then slowly over time bringing it out into the world.
Nina brought the trunk out of her basement. She stopped working and instead spent 2 years sifting through what was left of her mother's work.
Really just trying to process who my mother was and where my pain came from. And in that time, I received a letter from this company where my mother had done post-production on her films.
The letter said the lab was going digital. It was notifying Nina that it had the original film of Kathleen's movies.
The letter said you owe us back storage fees and you also need to take these films off our hands. And I ignored the letters for about 2 years because I didn't know what to do.
In the end, a Yale professor who teaches her mother's film finally spurs Nina into action.
She said to me, when I show Losing Ground to my black female students, they cry because they have never seen anyone remotely like themselves represented in film. You have to save this film.
Nina spent $25,000 having the film's sound and color corrected and digitally remastered. It was acquired by a film company and shown at a festival in 2015.
I woke up the morning of the screening and there was a front page arts review in the New York Times calling her a genius, basically. In the New Yorker, there was a big review saying that, this film had been nearly lost and was a masterpiece. It was this incredible review.
From there, the legacy of Kathleen Collins started to spread out of Nina's trunk and into the world. Nina was carrying unresolved trauma from Kathleen's early death for decades. Anger that her mother was so often preoccupied by her work and kept her illness secret. Seeing the reception given to these films wasn't just beneficial for her mother's legacy as an artist, it was deeply cathartic to Nina too.
My relationship with her will always be unfinished. I mean, she died. I was too young to ever have a lot of conversations with her that I wish I had had. But I'm grateful every day that I'm still here for my kids, that I can forgive myself and forgive her. That I got to this place is really good.
This is so emotionally powerful. I can't help wondering if there might be a lesson here too. I think of the words of the artist, Yan, and how the gold dust in art can be in allowing others to be a part of the creative process. But completing or finishing someone else's work isn't straightforward. It's fraught, isn't it, with ethical questions around whether or not that person may have wanted their artistic endeavour finished by someone else. Kafka left his published and unpublished work to his friend, Max Brod, along with the explicit instruction that the work should be destroyed on Kafka's death. And although Brod didn't publish everything left to him, he didn't also completely honour his friend's request. I have to say, I find myself torn on this. On the one hand, there is something really troubling about breaking a solemn promise, even posthumously. And yet, on the other hand, Kafka's works have become iconic in Western literature and provided solace to the millions who have read them. This ethical conundrum applies elsewhere too. Jen has craft projects she started that she would never ever want completed.
There's a lot of stuff that I try, and I'm like, I don't think I need this crocheted bikini top anymore. But I didn't throw it away. God forbid I pass away tomorrow, my 18-year-old would be like, oh, Mom always wanted this done. Let's bury her in this.
Let's hope they're listening to this, Jen. Now, Macy and Jen are in the business of resurrecting unfinished projects left behind by others in the hundreds. They have to figure out the moral boundaries for completing the work of someone else when they don't know what they wanted for it. Composer and artist Jan Hendrikse is facing this very issue. His late wife, Claire, was a musician, researcher, and performer. She passed away in 2022 after being unwell for a few years.
When she died, she was in the middle of a PhD, which was to do with resurrecting an instrument called the trumpet marine or the tromba marina that died out in the 18th century or 17th century. She didn't complete her PhD and she didn't complete the research, and the instruments are in a state of unfinishedness. And they have been reconstructed largely, but there are still many things that are unknown about how they were set up and how they were played. We only have the remains of the instruments and what's been written about them.
After deliberating, Jan and his family consciously started a process of carrying forward Claire's work.
The PhD project will never be completed in the way that Claire imagined it, but I think she started a process, and that process feels like it needs to continue. The intention has to be to try to respect the legacy and the integrity of the work, but also to allow the richness of what she did to have a life beyond her work, so that it sort of passes beyond her and into the world in a different form. Your own sense of what's right for someone's work gets activated in a very specific kind of way, and it feels as if you are in contact with that person again. It sounds very strange, but that's the sensation.
I can see why Jan feels such a strong urge to continue what his wife started. He feels a connection with her memory by getting close to the thought processes that informed her work. And it bolsters my view that the value in unfinishedness is perhaps most profoundly revealed in creative work. And throughout history, people have turned to creativity in moments of grief. Americans embroidered weeping willows in silk when George Washington died. Victorian women hand-stitched brooches in their bereavement. And loose ends, started by Macy and Jen, taps into the potential of stitching to alleviate grief in a similar way.
We have more than 25,000 volunteer finishers from 64 different countries, and we've matched more than 2,000 projects.
Patty Gardner waited 9 months while Jen and Macy found the right person to take on the task of completing the blankets her mother had started.
These are the most well-traveled remnants of blankets. They went from Alabama to my house in Oregon to Jen's house in Seattle to Portland.
But in the end, one of them was finished by a woman who lived right near Patty's home.
We met in a park and I brought her peonies from my garden, and when I picked up the blanket, I felt this great sense of what a gift. What a gift. And I kept saying that over and over again. This really meant a lot because we all got to witness her trying so hard to finish these.
The blanket was large and blue. It was originally intended to match the furniture in her brother's house.
With my mom, there were things that she really, really cared about. And I personally, either through my own efforts or through my friends' efforts and the greater world's effort, was able to get all the things that she really cared about taken care of. And the blankets were part of that. I don't have to question anything with her life because it's all taken care of.
I have to confess, I thought I'd probably end up disputing the value of unfinished work. I'm a former sports person, and it's all about winning, all about the trophy. It's not about the process, but I think I now see its profound power, not just in coming to terms with grief, but connecting with people in new ways and reimagining the creative process. I think back to the novel that I started but never got round to finishing in my early 30s, not as a failure, but perhaps as the start of a love of writing. Or the job I started in investment banking but only lasted 8 weeks, not as evidence of a lack of staying power, but perhaps a willingness to try new things. But above all, I now realise that the itch to complete things isn't always morally admirable, because What does it mean to complete life? We all end in the same place, don't we? Life isn't about completing, it's about living. You've been listening to Sideways. The producer of this episode was Vishva Samani. The editor is Catherine Godfrey. Sideways is produced by Novel for BBC Radio 4.
And this series is not complete. Matthew will be back with another episode of Sideways at the same time next week. Muriel Mackay's kidnapper has stopped calling, so the family used the press to catch his attention. In a moment, we'll continue to hear the true and tragic case of mistaken identity that shook Britain and launched a tabloid. But first, look ahead to Friday, when there's more suspense on Radio 4.
On BBC Radio 4, across cultures and throughout history, remarkably similar stories have been told by those who have glimpsed what lies beyond the door between our world and the world of the dead. An unmissable drama about a near-death experience. We once believed death occurred at the exact moment the heart stopped beating. We now know this is not true. 11 Minutes Dead, part of the Limelight dramas on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds.
No, that's not true.
Tell me what you see, Beth.
That's not true.
Listen on Friday afternoons at 2:50.
Now, Worse Than Murder, the investigative journalist Jane McSorley continues the story of the vanishing of Muriel Mackay as wild media speculation fills a void left by the kidnappers, who also seem to have disappeared.
Muriel Mackay's family are waiting for the phone to ring. They're expecting another call from M3, the man who kidnapped Muriel less than a week ago. He said he would phone with instructions about how to deliver him an eye-watering ransom of £1 million. But every time the phone rings, it's not him. Instead, the line is clogged with journalists.
Yeah, I'm sorry to test you like this. Yeah.
Well-wishers,
My husband don't find it very generally much.
even people with connections to other realms.
I am Sergeant Pendleton. Where's our name Jarvis before she was married?
Her maiden name?
Yes.
No.
You won't.
No.
Oh, I see.
The Mackays answered calls day and night. They're desperate for any information about Muriel, but none of the calls are from M3. He's vanished. In the days after Muriel Mackay was kidnapped on the 29th of December 1969, M3 moved quickly. He called the family multiple times and sent a letter from Muriel in her own handwriting, proving that his impossible demand for £1 million, almost 14 million today, ought to be taken seriously. But the date he gave for the ransom delivery has passed, and M3 has gone quiet. The police are trying to work out who M3 could be. A family member, a local criminal gang, an old newspaper rival of Muriel's husband, Alec? Or could this all have something to do with Rupert Murdoch? You see, the first time M3 phoned the Mackay family, he told them something shocking. He meant to take Rupert Murdoch's wife, but he took Muriel instead. My name is Jane McSorley. I've been an investigative journalist for over 3 decades. I've become fascinated by Muriel's disappearance, the impact it's had on her family for 55 long years, and what it tells us about the British tabloid press at a pivotal moment in its history. To get inside the story, I've teamed up with the writer Simon Farker, who wrote a book about Muriel's case and has spent years piecing together every last scrap of evidence. The case was officially closed in 1970, but Muriel's body was never found. Her family have never been able to lay her to rest. But just as we were finishing off this series, we got remarkable news. After negotiating with Muriel's family, one of the men convicted of her murder offered to help locate her remains. The Metropolitan Police reopened the search and agreed to dig once again. That's all to come, but in this episode, we're heading straight into the media circus and the frenzied public response that surrounded this case. From BBC Radio 4, this is Intrigue, Worse Than Murder. Episode 3, The Waiting Game. Muriel's disappearance is a huge news story, and very soon pretty much everyone in Britain knows her name. Her daughter Jennifer remembers that as each day passed, the press would do whatever they could to deliver fresh angles on the case and draw in readers.
All those poor journalists who've been told to go and sit out there. I mean, they'd be there all night. Di and I used to make them tea. It was freezing. It was a very cold winter.
Thing is, at least some of those journalists camped outside the house were there with the family's blessing. Muriel's husband Alec is the deputy chairman at Rupert Murdoch's News Limited, the company which owned The Sun and The News of the World. And Alec believes that press attention can be used to the family's advantage to drum up information about Muriel's whereabouts as they wait for M3 to call again. As we've pieced together the media coverage of this case, it's striking to me just how many details there are at this point when the police have so few leads. The press will report on any detail they can get their hands on. On New Year's Day in 1970, the day after the family received a handwritten letter from Muriel, the contents are splashed across the front page of Murdoch's Sun newspaper. Her desperate pleas for help are there for the world to see. And on January the 2nd, when the family doctor, Tadeusz Markowitz, visits Alec at home, the press surround him, firing off questions about Muriel's health.
It's important that you get the injection, very important, very quickly. How often does she get the injection? About three a month.
The family want to panic the kidnapper. They've told the press Muriel suffers from a number of conditions they can't disclose. She needs prescription drugs, and they've asked Dr. Markowitz to play along.
Is there any suggestion that her life might be dangerous? Well, it's very difficult.
It's so striking. You can almost hear the journalists spinning their yarn. They're barely asking questions. But even though poor Dr. Markowitz is visibly uncomfortable being a part of this narrative, The Sun carries the story on January the 3rd, 1970. Vanished wife in serious danger. Doctor's injection warning. It's not the only big news that day.
When your father first saw the picture, can you ask him what he was able to tell from it?
An old friend of the Mackays travels to consult with the famous Dutch clairvoyant Gerard Croiset, all filmed by an ITN camera crew, of course.
He first wants to see if the woman was alive or dead.
And that may mean English, not that.
Through my opinion, she is still alive.
After studying a map of the Greater London area, Kwasi pinpoints a farm cottage north-northeast of the capital, close to the Epping phone box M3 made his first call from. A police search returns no new leads, but it is, of course, zealously reported on by the press.
As a result of that news broadcast, there was something like 157 calls in 5 hours to the police station from people all claiming they'd had dreams and theories about what they were.
This is the writer Simon Farker, who's written a book on the Muriel Mackay case and knows every little detail. As we've been piecing together the story for this podcast, he's been helping me better understand the case.
The press were looking for a new angle, and it just captured the imagination of a lot of people who, maybe some of them were attention seekers and some of them were well-meaning and thought they were genuine, but they just bombarded them with nonsense. It cluttered up the inquiry enormously.
Of course, it's easy to raise an eyebrow, but Muriel's daughter, Jennifer Mackay, told us the families were grateful for any information they could get.
I know that we all sort of sneer at people who think they've got some kind of spiritualist knowledge or something like that. But when you're in a fix like that, you'll take anything that's going and give everything a chance.
Members of the public even called Mackays at home. Whilst they wait for M3 to phone again, they pick up and record every call they can, hoping for information that will help them find Muriel. For this series, the Mackays have shared these calls with us, kept for more than 50 years, and some are genuinely shocking.
At this very moment, you've got a gun in your bag. But ask the people who have the gun in your bag, what do they want?
They just want something.
So if it's money, money can be arranged. If it's revenge, my God, they've had that.
They've got my mother as well now.
They've got your mother as well.
I don't know what they want her for either.
Unable to bear the pressure, Alec Mackay is sedated by Dr. Markovitz. His family continue to answer the phone. Jennifer and Ian told me some of the techniques they adopted to cope.
We used to have a tumbler full of brandy, and whoever was doing the phone answering would be so stressed out. You'd just have a gulp of this fire water, and it helped.
I would start reading a passage from the Bible, and they'll eventually ring off. You just can't believe that people could behave in such an appalling way.
The thing is, the prank calls and letters can't ever be dismissed, especially ones from anyone claiming to have Muriel. Some are simply sadistic.
Hello, 9462656.
Listen, my God, we can't prove anything to her because she's dead. If you value her corpse, then you better listen to us tomorrow.
The press coverage has left the Mackays vulnerable to extortion. One caller promises to return Muriel for £5,000, another for just 500. Diane Mackay, Muriel and Alec's daughter, explained to me the desperation they felt each time someone claimed to have Muriel in their grasp.
We never thought it was hope. We always thought, oh my God, yes. We weren't cynical. We were desperate.
Lead Detective Bill Smith sent his team to investigate every new lead they can, but none of them lead anywhere. After the family received Muriel's letter, Smith is pretty sure that M3, with his £1 million ransom demand, is the right suspect. But as the phone rings almost off the hook, it feels as though M3 is the only person in the country who is leaving the Mackays alone. Then one day, they get an extraordinary call from someone who thinks they understand why M3 is being so quiet.
Now, I've been in prison for a number of years. I'm not a kidnapper, I'm not a murderer, I'm not anything like that.
Having served and survived a sentence at Broadmoor, a high-security psychiatric hospital, the caller says he understands the minds of merciless criminals. He thinks the Mackays have made a mistake involving the press.
I know it's done out of, what's my name? Dying.
Yes.
But, you see, people like criminals who do this do not first sit down and realise the misery it's going to cause them as well as the person concerned.
The caller has a proposal, though.
I think they would be quite willing at this stage really to let money go if they got that assurance from someone in authority such as yourself or that would be the end of it.
He even offers to pass on a message to any known criminals the family might suspect. Give back Muriel, and the Mackays won't pursue the matter any further. The Mackays are tempted.
I've had a talk with my father, and he agrees. He thinks the idea is very good, and he doesn't want to take action against the people who have her. All he wants to have her back.
Problem is, without further word from their suspect M3, the police are no further on in working out who he actually is. The police have followed up on sightings across the country, talked to every underworld connection they have, sent over a dozen officers on a ground search of Epping Forest, smashed through every frozen lake in London, and still nothing. They've got very little to go on. There's M3's West Indian accent, the physical evidence, and fingerprints found at the house. And there's also another puzzling fact we've not discussed in detail yet, but which is absolutely crucial. The police think this is a case of mistaken identity. Simon Farquhar again.
On that first M3 call, he says, "We tried to get Rupert Murdoch's wife, we couldn't get her, so we took yours instead." It became clear that because Alec was using Murdoch's Rolls Royce at the time, that had to be significant.
1969 was a huge year for Murdoch. He bought the News of the World and the Sun. He'd quickly established himself as a household name and a force to be reckoned with on Fleet Street. His wife Anna, a journalist herself, is a major press presence too, taking part in photo opportunities and doing TV interviews.
It's rather embarrassing to go with him to a newsagent's or shop, because he always rearranges the layout of the papers. If his papers aren't on top, while I'm talking, he's shuffling away at the other side, putting the News of the World on top.
At Christmas, the Murdochs headed back to Australia for some much-needed R&R, and Alec Mackay, his deputy, was loaned the company's Rolls-Royce. The police figure that M3 must have trailed Murdoch's car, hoping that it would take him to Anna Murdoch, but instead, it took him to Muriel Mackay. And in spite of making such a huge mistake, it seems M3 ploughed ahead with the kidnapping anyway.
They must have realised that this wasn't Anna Murdoch at some point fairly soon, because the first phone call admits that it's not her. But I think they would have realised as well that whoever this is close enough to the Murdoch million that it will do.
The Murdochs are advised to stay on in Australia until Muriel is found. They're still at risk. And the fact that Anna Murdoch was M3's target is kept out of the news. Incredible though this all seems, is this really why Muriel's been abducted? Mistaken identity theory is an important line of inquiry for the police. Could M3 have a grudge against Rupert Murdoch or his newly acquired papers? Murdoch was already a divisive figure in the UK, attracting criticism for his salacious exposés in the News of the World, something that Jennifer Mackay would often try to bring up with her father.
The News of the World was offending someone all the time on every page. I had an ongoing argument which was, do you really think that's wise, and are you not causing more harm? The public has a right to know, he would say. I said, yes, that's all very well, but what if it happened to you? Would you really want them all washing your dirty linen in public? Anyway, he certainly got his comeuppance, didn't he?
Jennifer wasn't alone in her frustration at the tabloid press.
It starts. Why should that organisation worry the time night murder Mrs. McCain? They pay out hundreds of thousands of pounds for the life stories of certain girls. So why shouldn't they pay me money for not murdering Mrs. McCain?
In early January 1970, the editor of a small North London newspaper, the Hornsey Journal, receives an anonymous letter from someone claiming to have kidnapped Muriel. The reason he gives is the corrupting influence of Murdoch's papers, The Sun and the News of the World, on young girls. The letter was another hoax, another dead end. But as Alec's daughter Diane recalls, the family are wondering if there might be a different newspaper connection.
They say, who would have anything against you? And he knew jolly well that Hugh Cudlip was against him.
Hugh Cudlip was Alec's old boss at the Daily Mirror, credited with building the paper's 5 million strong readership. After Alec went to work with Rupert Murdoch, sworn enemy of the Mirror, Cudlip felt betrayed. When I went to visit Ian Mackay in Australia, Alec's son, he showed me a letter his father received from Cudlip shortly after he signed with Murdoch.
Well, did you bring the letter?
Yeah, that's from Hugh Cudlip. I can read it for you.
Read it out, yes.
My dear Alec, I would like to let you know there is some feeling amongst your colleagues of the notion that you should join the News of the World board as a non-executive director. We hope, I need hardly say, that you are not seriously considering the offer.
After suffering 2 heart attacks, Alec had retired from the Daily Mirror in October 1969, the advice of his doctor. Cudlip was of the understanding that Alec wouldn't take on any more work at an executive level, least of all for a newspaper rival.
You will remember that during one of our talks together, I mentioned likely that our arrangement was to prolong your life and not free you to work for Rupert.
Given how little they had to go on, I can see how the family might think this could be a strong lead.
Hugh Cudlip had a boat on the Thames, and I remember my sister and I, we went out and we drove all along the Thames. We just said, oh my God, you think she's there? You know, maybe we'll know if she is.
Imagine what all those reporters camped in the cold outside the house in Wimbledon would have made of that. The headlines almost write themselves. But of course, it's not true. The thing is, without further word from M3, the police are struggling to make progress, and they're keeping some details close to their chests. Simon Farquhar again.
The press never knew about the Rolls-Royce and the Murdoch connection, so after a while they started probably thinking, why was this person kidnapped? It just seems very, very strange that someone so unlikely would have been taken. So they started writing articles with headlines like "a case that does not add up."
Those fact-starved reporters stuck outside the Mackay's home feel like speculation is their only option. They're even starting to doubt Muriel as being kidnapped at all.
The evidence does seem to be growing stronger towards the fact that she may just purely have left home after possibly a domestic dispute.
We found this incredible footage in the BBC archive from January the 8th, 1970. A TV reporter joined the newsmen outside the house, asking for their best guess about what has happened to Muriel Mackay.
With her state of health, time's getting on, nearly 11 days. She could well be dead.
The only other possible explanation I could see now, after 10 days, would most probably be not a kidnapping for ransom of money, but more of a vendetta.
These are all good stories, and stories sell, but they are totally made up. Desperate for new headlines, the press actually chased Detective Sergeant Walter White down the street.
I went to find a public telephone in the area, and I found that I had a retinue of press behind me, so I had to dump them before I made any telephone calls.
Muriel's son Ian told us the press coverage was relentless.
So I remember being on the page practically every major London daily for 6 weeks. This was really the start of the tabloid wars.
The most brazen reporters called the Mackay house to run their speculations past the family.
ITN here, the name is Reed. It's concerning one paragraph that our crime correspondent has filed, that the police have not ruled out the possibility that Mrs. Mackay may have gone away voluntarily.
This is absolute rubbish, and of course they don't believe that.
The Mackays, who initially felt the press might help find Muriel, are starting to feel hounded. For his part, DCS Bill Smith feels it is precisely this media circus that is making M3 keep his distance. It's now been over a week since they heard from him, since they've had any real lead. But given that the genie is now out of the bottle, Smith wonders if one last direct appeal from the family would be worth trying to smoke M3 out from wherever he is hiding. On January the 9th, Alec delivers the appeal to the kidnapper.
I just cannot understand why those holding Muriel have not contacted me recently. I appeal to you to contact me by telephone, letter, or telegram.
The very next day, a letter lands on the desk of Stafford Summerfield, editor of the News of the World. We've asked an actor to read it out for us. It's written in an eerie, spidery script, all capital letters. Could it be M3 at last?
I'm writing these lines to you because I can't get through to Alex Mackay by phone, for it is bugged by police. If you're his friend, you will contact him discreetly, telling him his wife is safe and well. How long will this continue depends on how much cooperation Alex Mackay will give us.
Summerfield takes the letter straight to the Mackay house and presents it to Alec and Bill Smith. They can't be sure it's from M3. It isn't signed, but there again is that demand for £1 million. And again, there's a terrifying threat.
When you authorize the police out of his home and is free to talk, I shall telephone him, giving instructions and proof of his wife's existence for a ransom of £1 million. If he cooperates, you will see his wife. If you don't cooperate, I shall not be contacting him anymore, and his wife will be disposed of.
The letter ends with a promise. M3 will telephone again. 14th of January, M3 finally breaks his fortnight of silence.
Yes? This is concerning your mother, your mistress.
M3 gets quickly to the point.
We'll send you a letter from your wife. Yes? Give you enough proof. And we'll tell you where you gotta give us the money. A letter giving you instructions what you gotta do, alright? Alright, yes. Sort of cooperate and you get your money back. Is she worried? Well, you know, of course she is. Yes. Thinking why you're not acting quick responsible.
It's hard to believe your ears. After 2 weeks of no contact, M3 is suggesting that Alec is the one failing to cooperate, to act quickly. That this is something Muriel has said. It's so cruel. With another letter promised containing instructions on getting Muriel home, Smith knows this could be their only chance to catch M3. But it's now over 2 weeks since she was first taken. In spite of what M3 claims, the police are losing hope that finding M3 will mean finding Muriel alive. Bill Smith decides it's time to have a delicate conversation with Alec to prepare him for the worst. Bill goes to Alec's bedroom, where he's still in his pajamas.
As you know, one must expect that you've probably never seen Muriel again. Can you sort of accept this? And he cried. He did virtually cry. Dear man cries, terrible thing. A man of his stature.
For me, this is such a raw image. Alec sitting on his bed, still in his pajamas, being asked to come to terms with the fact that his wife might be dead. Bill Smith, the detective chief superintendent, sitting next to him, comforting Alec as best he can. Two men of the same generation where shows of emotion like this were even rarer than they are today. Alec will need all the strength he can muster. The next call could come at any moment, and Smith needs Alec to try and get M3 to commit to a meeting, to demand proof that Muriel is alive.
When these people telephone, we've got to make an appointment to see them, meet them, ask over money, for her to come back to you. We've got to make them believe that we believe she's alive and that we're willing to negotiate with them.
But when M3 calls again, Muriel's letter hasn't arrived, and Alec, of course, is still devastated, desperate for proof that Muriel is alive.
Can't you get her to write to me and give some proof that she is still alive and well? Ask her what she got for Christmas presents, the full name of her children. But she told us the children. She told us what the son-in-law do for a living. She told us everything.
M3 dodging requests for proof that Muriel is alive is not a good sign. Alec cracks.
Look, bring a gun here and shoot me rather than ask unreasonable situations. I mean, I can't get that. It's ridiculous. Well, nobody's got £1 million, and I mean, quite frankly, it's ridiculous.
M3 is single-minded. He finally wants that £1 million ransom, and he's finally talking about setting up a meeting to get it with Alec and Murdoch's Rolls Royce.
That car doesn't belong to me and you know that, so I can say, have me instead. Take me instead. Yes, have me instead. It's my order, that is fine. I've got nothing more to say.
Next time on Worse Than Murder.
Our only hope was to get the money out there, which was the bait, and see what we could catch.
Worse Than Murder is presented by me, Jane McSorley. It is produced by Nadia Mady, with sound design by Basil Oxtoby, and is a Telltale production for BBC Radio 4.
This summer, immerse yourself in the world's greatest classical music festival. From epic Holst and monumental Beethoven to Sam Smith.
To James O'Brien on LBC, where my eye was caught this morning by an article in the Liverpool Echo detailing The conviction of a man who pleaded guilty to violent disorder at Liverpool Crown Court. Obviously, he was caught up in the rioting, and the Echo reports people chanting obscenities about Allah and accusing the police of having kept information from them. So, where on earth does someone like that get the idea that the police...
Planned for today. Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle has advised MPs who have high-profile constituency offices to consider working from home. The Chief Constable of Cleveland Police, Mark Webster, said forces across England are prepared to use an awful lot of resources over the coming days. He told Today that his force had arrested an 11-year-old involved in the disorder.
We put 28 people in front of the court yesterday. There'll be more coming as well. We've arrested 65 in total. In relation to Middlesbrough, from ages of 16 to 56, Hartlepool was a similar profile, but we did arrest one youth as young as 11. And I think the dawning realisation of some of them, the level of trouble they're in, is beginning to hit them. We saw that at court yesterday.
More than 1,000 British military personnel have been put on standby to help with the evacuation of British nationals from Lebanon, after the Foreign Office warned that the situation could deteriorate rapidly. Hundreds of troops have been sent to Cyprus, where the UK already has a military presence, and hundreds more are on notice. The water regulator Ofwat is to appoint an independent monitor to Thames Water to assess the company's progress towards turning around both its performance and its finances. Last month, Thames Water's credit rating was downgraded twice by agencies, breaching the terms of its licence. Ofwat has proposed a £104 million fine on the firm as a punishment for sewage spills. The Minnesota Governor, Tim Walz, has made his first appearance as Kamala Harris's running mate in the race for the White House, describing their Republican opponents as weird as hell. The pair were welcomed by Democrats at a rally in Philadelphia. The Medicines watchdog NICE says tens of thousands of women who've gone through the menopause might benefit from a new bone-strengthening drug, abaloparatide. It can protect against the bone-thinning condition osteoporosis. The drug will become available on the NHS in England within 3 months. BBC News.
There'll be another hot spell looming come the weekend, and heat waves and heat-related deaths set to increase further in a warming world. What can we do to keep our homes cool? Well, that's one of the topics we'll be covering in You and Yours this lunchtime, and we'll join Winifred Robinson just after midday. But first, standing coolly by with Woman's Hour, here's Neil McGovern.
Hello and welcome to Woman's Hour. Well, today a lawyer for the Centre for Military Justice is calling for an independent inquiry into the treatment of Black, Asian and ethnic minority service personnel in the military. We're going to hear her reasons why, and we'll also hear from Kerry-Ann Knight. She is a former servicewoman who recounts the racist and sexist abuse she says she experienced while serving. Also, later this hour, the country lies of women we often associate with the city. Virginia Woolf is one. We're going to hear more about how London's Bloomsbury set of creatives found sanctuary and experimentation in their rural retreats. I spent yesterday afternoon in an explosion of colour and music, finding out more about the fantastically great women who changed the world. It is a musical. You'll hear a performance of one of the songs from one of the stars of the show this hour. And we'll also hear from a distant relative of Emily Pankhurst, who wrote the book on which this musical is based. So looking forward to speaking to both of those fantastic women. If you want to get in touch with the programme on anything you hear, the number is 84844. On social media, we're at BBC Woman's Hour, or you can email us through our website. For a voice note, that number is 03700 100 444, or indeed a WhatsApp message. But let us begin this morning with a very powerful and personal story that you might find upsetting when you hear the details. In the past week, Kerry-Ann Knight, who served in the army for over a decade, has spoken for the first time about the years of racist and sexist abuse she received while serving, saying it made her life a living hell. Her experience has led a lawyer, who is an expert in this field, to call for an inquiry into the experiences of Black, Asian and ethnic minority service personnel in the armed forces. We're going to hear from that lawyer shortly. But first to Kerry-Ann Knight, who in 2019 was the face of a recruitment poster for the military, saying she wanted to encourage more individuals of colour to join. But she says now, following the treatment she received, she would no longer recommend that. She describes boxes and dirty crockery being piled high on her desk, of a senior colleague asking her to get naked at an army event, and male soldiers shouting racially offensive insults at her. She began secretly recording conversations, and she eventually took her case to an employment tribunal and accepted a substantial settlement from the Ministry of Defence last month, although with no admission of liability, something we will get into. She also received an apology from the army. I spoke to Kerry-Ann yesterday, and I began by asking her why she wanted to join the armed forces.
After the army came in and did a presentation on life in the army, this was in college, and I thought, wow, this is the place for me. They spoke about a sense of family, that camaraderie that you build with your peers that lasts for a lifetime, etc. And I really wanted that at that stage in my life, and it just sounded like such a dream, and I was extremely excited.
And so you decided to sign up. But how long was it, Kerry-Ann, before you realised it definitely was not the dream you were expecting? It was nightmarish at times from some of your testimony.
It was pretty much instantaneously. As soon as I stepped through the gate, it was clear that I wasn't welcomed and accepted because I was a black woman.
I know you had difficulty with one woman who was senior to you. And how did that manifest itself? How did you come to the conclusion that her actions were based on race?
Just the numerous comments that she'd make. For example, just for my swimming lessons, I wanted to put just a couple of braids in my hair in order to protect it, and she wouldn't allow it. Reminded me, as she said, that I wasn't in the ghetto. When I was marching, she'd remind me I'm not in the ghetto as well, in terms of my buttocks were swaying too much. So just remembered just really having to try and focus and literally tensing my buttocks as if I was tensing my abs, just to make sure I wasn't appearing to have a walk as if I was in the ghetto. Yeah, so right away I knew if I'd embraced anything to do with my race, it would be seen as or taken as ghetto too. So I had to act and speak as white as I possibly could in front of her.
Kerry-Ann, I've read that you said you served alongside soldiers who came to support the people of the Ku Klux Klan. I've also read that you said boxes and dirty crockery would be piled high on your desk. And you've also given other examples of racism. But did you also encounter sexism?
Yeah.